Well, good morning, Vision Church. If you could stay standing, we are going to, at this time while we're at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to jump into the scripture reading this morning. I am preaching this morning. My name is Pastor Sandy, one of the elders here. And again, just a special welcome. So glad you could join us. If you would open your word this morning, we will be Old Testament book of Lamentations. Book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verses 19 through 24. Verses 19 through 24. So here at Vision, we do stand, which I appreciate you standing with me in honor of the Lord and the reading of His Word. And so I would invite you to join with me, and we will read these 6 verses together. Again, Lamentations 3, 19 through 24. Starting with verse 19, would you join with me this morning? Remember my affliction and my homelessness, the wormwood and the poison. I continually remember them and have become depressed. Yet I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not perish, for His mercies never end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will put my hope in Him. Would you pray with me this morning? Father God, would there be clarity in what you have for us this morning from what I say? Would there be conviction in my heart as well as in the listeners today? And would the person of Christ be honored and glorified and made known by what is spoken today? God, would you hide me behind the cross so that your message would be what is so clear and evident as you draw people to yourself? This is what we pray, this is what we ask, this is what we plead, this is what we hope for. And we ask all these things in your name with thanksgiving. And everybody said, amen. You may be seated. Well, we are continuing today in the Testify series, and I know you've heard from some guest preachers as well as some preachers here at Vision Church, and it is an honor to come before you again as we testify to God's power through our own personal story, and I hope to share that through today, again, using Lamentations as a backdrop to be able to share how God has been at work in my life. And I hope that you will be encouraged as you begin to think about how God has been actively at work in your life as well. Let me give you just a quick backdrop of this book of Lamentations. Lamentations are also known as aloud cries. This is an eyewitness account, most likely from the prophet Jeremiah. That's what most scholars would say. During or soon after Jerusalem's fall in 586 BC to the Babylonians and King Nebuchadnezzar. Likely Jeremiah, the prophet, saw the destruction. He witnessed the destruction of walls and towers, homes, palace, and temple. He saw the place that he lived falling down before his very eyes. He witnessed the fierce brutality of King Nebuchadnezzar and his army. Even though Jeremiah, like the much larger prophetic book that we know as Jeremiah, he preached of a coming judgment and doom for the people of Israel. And yet, as he is doing this, we still see a response here in Lamentations loaded with great sorrow and compassion towards these often obstinate, but yes, suffering people. Now, we must remember that in this book, again, that there was a looming prophecy that the seeds of this had been sowed all the way back in Joshua, where we learned that if Israel could not keep their covenant with the Lord, which was commanded that they should go and worship no other gods, that if they did, the Lord's anger would certainly burn against them and dire consequences would follow. So, of course, Jeremiah, we know him as the weeping prophet. He has a tough message. And even as he's seeing the destruction of a city and town of his own people, Jerusalem, he still speaks of God's faithfulness, of his sovereign will, even judgment, and yet compassion and hope. Now, I love this. The Jewish community who recognizes this book, the Book of Lamentations, as a part of their sacred canon, they read this book, Lamentations, within their calendar year to remember the date of Jerusalem's destruction. So they have an annual reading of Lamentations as a reminder of what happened in their past. This book, with its primary themes of lamenting and the response of hope found in God's compassion, is meant to be a tangible reminder of God's judgment, yes, but yet his spectacular faithfulness. And this tension is, I believe, a really powerful reminder to us, to me, even at this moment, as we live in the suffering and trials of today, and yet hold on to the hope and mercies offered afresh each morning. Now, unless you've been under a rock, you know that the past 2 weeks, if you've turned on your television in the evening, what have you been watching? The Olympics, absolutely. And how amazing are the Olympics? Now, again, I must admit to you, I'm a track runner. That's my backdrop, which is quite possibly the greatest sport in the Olympics. And this past week in particular, the second half of the Olympics, we have seen some incredible performances. Yes, absolutely. And do we have any Aggies in the house? Well, here we go. Yeah, we do. If you didn't watch or didn't know, yes, the North Carolina A&T Aggies have an incredible quarter-miler program where they had some guys compete in the Olympics. So we have connections locally. And actually, I'm not going to bore you, but there are actually a lot of other track and field athletes from this area or the Triangle. We are a hotbed of fast people. Now, but if you also watch, this crazy, there's a lot of new sports this year. Did y'all see, surfing is a new sport, skateboarding, sport climbing, and 3-on-3 basketball. I can only imagine what could be next. Maybe pickleball. What are we going to see in 3 years? But I think the best part to me, and then what makes it so engaging, is that every night, not only do we see the competition, but we see the stories behind the athletes. We begin to learn about what it took for them to get there, the trials and tribulations, injuries, qualifying, COVID, all the things that have made their journey so powerful. And I believe that's actually some of the power of watching the Olympics is yes, I mean, watching America or other countries, win a gold medal or a medal for the first time, I love that. But I think more than anything, it's the stories, the human element that draw us in, that go way deeper and beyond a gold medal even. And so I take that and I think, well, why do we not think our own stories cannot give a powerful testimony to the backdrop of our lives? Why do we not believe in the power of our own testimony to be such a powerful example of how Christ has been at work in our life? I chose the scripture this morning because, for me, it has been a bedrock. It has been a foundation during some incredibly dark times. And so as I testified to God's power, I wanted to start from scripture, from a place that for me, I've gone to time and time again. So I'd like to submit to you this morning as we stay in Lamentations and want to encourage you this. So as you're listening to me this morning, my challenge to you is that each one of you would become better storytellers. Because I believe that all my heart, and I really do, that the evangelism within our city, within your home, within your work, within our families, with the life-changing message of Jesus Christ, we must be constant storytellers who are bringing to the forefront the power of God at work through Jesus Christ in the fine details of our life. Constant storytellers. So my thought tattoo this morning is this: we remember by telling. We hold on by hoping in Him. We'll say that again. We remember by telling. We hold on by hoping in Him. him. The first point this morning is I want us, as we begin to tell our stories, the way God has entered into our life, is to do this. We must tell the entire story. We must tell the entire story. Verses 19 and 20. Jeremiah says this, "Remember my affliction and my homelessness, the wormwood and the poison. I continually remember them and have become depressed." Now, I love how Jeremiah here calls out the tribulations that he's experiencing. He is calling them out to God, yes, but I believe he's also calling them out to himself. He's naming them. He's letting the reader know, you and I, in detail, what he's facing and how it's impacting him. He says he's afflicted. He said he's homeless because of the destruction. He's bitter. That's what the wormwood talks about. It would impact the water. So he's actually drinking bitter water as a reminder of the bitter situation that they're in. There's some level of poison present, whether that's from the brutality of the army, of the Babylonian army. Maybe it was something that the food had gone bad. I don't know, but there is a poison in place. And then he says this, he's depressed. We see an instance of the mental health, or rather the mental unhealth of the prophet here because of things that he's going through. There's a brutal honesty that he cannot shake. He says, I continually remember them. I love, as you guys know, our lead pastor, Pastor Jerome, says this. He asks this question rhetorically, who talks to you the most? You do. And he says, you regularly give yourself bad counsel. Amen? Why? Because in our head, we are allowing our mind to speak to us instead of us speaking to our mind with the truths of the gospel rooted squarely in the Word of God. We're going to get to that here in a second, but I think it's so important as Jeremiah speaks here that we have to share in the midst of what you are going through, whether it's depression, whether it's cancer, whether it's rejection, loneliness. The list goes on. But can we be honest that we begin to connect to people through our brutal honesty and our vulnerability? People feel the message of Jesus as we begin to pour out our story in honest ways. Ever since I graduated from school in 2010, I have made a yearly pilgrimage up to upstate New York. And I go up there to connect with guys that I ran with back at Georgetown. The group of guys, I ran track and field and cross country there. And the guys that are in my class, we're great friends, and we've made a commitment once a year to go see each other, which is always interesting, just as we've seen this development. I'm sure we all have some college friends that we can say are in interesting places, amen? But one of the joys for me going to this trip each year is actually that it is a healing process for me. Because for 4 years of school, God led me. Again, sometimes I even wonder how I made it. God led me to a place where I would be under what I would call kind of an emotionally abusive coaching situation. He began to strip away things that I had built my identity around up to that point. Running, athletic endeavors being one of them. School was hard. Relationally, things were hard. I was underneath someone who I wanted so much approval from, and performance would have gotten me there, and yet that was one thing I was unable to accomplish. And it was in those 4 years that I don't look back and say, man, that was a great time. But that was a time that God had me go through that. I was in some dark places, and the guys that I was with, they saw that. I was almost a shell of myself. And so when I get around them these past 10 years since we've graduated, it is an opportunity for me to say, man, I was in a dark place. Y'all saw me. I was a shell of myself. You know why? I had trouble finishing races. I was seeking approval. There were things that I was going after to fill a deep void. And I can share that. And the beautiful thing that I do believe as I tell this story and walk it through with these guys in the healing process is that God makes it so evidently clear, as I'm faithful to share, just how he was intricately planning every step along the way. And I bet if you're honest today, there are things that you look back in your life and you begin to wonder, why is it that God allowed me to go through that? It doesn't make sense to me that I would have to endure that season. It doesn't make sense to me I was in that relationship. It doesn't make sense. Yet as we are faithful to share what God has done, sometimes we get glimpses of the beauty of how his sovereignty plays out, and it gives us hope and encouragement. And so I love Jeremiah this morning when he says, here are the things I'm going through. They're hard. And if I'm honest, they stay heavy on my mind. In the words of gospel legend Marvin Sapp, never would have made it. I never would have made it without you. I would have lost it all. But now I see how you were there for me. Is that not our testimony in times when we think, Lord, there's no way I could have made it through? And I believe that Jeremiah, even as a prophet, speaking on God's behalf, probably thought the same thing. It brought him to a point of depression. And yet, he continually tells his story. A couple things this morning that I believe that we have to hold on to so that we don't wait to tell our story. Because a lot of times we want to wait for the triumphant ending to say, here's what I came through. And yet sometimes it's God is saying, no, I want you to talk and share in the middle of what you're going through. And that's hard because why? It puts us on display. Going back, the vulnerability, the brutal honesty. Do you know that might be the thing? Someone may not believe this right here unless God opens their eyes. They may have a hard time believing the explicit gospel message, but when we live out or are able to share the things that we have gone through, do you not know that there is a connection point that people saying, I don't know if I believe that God that you're talking about yet, but I've been there where you've been. And it is in those connections that I believe we begin to lay the gospel groundwork. And I believe we really get to speak to three things in doing that. And I pulled from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, I think where we get three things that are spoken to that really point towards the importance of telling our story of what he's done, what he's doing, and what he will do. One is that as we share where you have been and where you are now, you are speaking to God's sufficient grace. 2 Corinthians 12:9 talks about that Paul, and we know Paul had a thorn in his side, and yet he shares that. He said, we don't know the exact thing, but we know that he is on a day-to-day struggle. He's on the grind bus, if you will. He's hurting. He said, there's a thorn in my flesh, and I asked 3 times. I pleaded for it to be taken away. But what do we know? That God said, my grace is sufficient. There is a sufficient grace in the midst of what you're going through. Secondly, it speaks to God's work in our weakness. Paul was regularly weak. We know that. He was shipwrecked. He was bitten by vipers. He was beaten and stoned, or he was beaten almost to the point of death with the lashes he received. He was, of course, blinded on the road to Damascus. We know the things that Paul was going through, and yet it is in his weakness that I believe that God had to keep him humble so that he could then proclaim an incredible message, the gospel message, as they began to build the early church. And lastly, as Paul talked about, it speaks to God's strength, not ours. Paul wanted Jesus to be on display in everything. I think sometimes, and I know I wrestle with this, the challenge that I have is that I want to hold on to certain parts of my story and not share them because it's going to make me feel like, oh man, what if they know this about me? What if they know that, man, I was in a depressed place? What if they know that I sought the approval of people in ministry to the detriment of others around me? What if they knew? Would they not listen? Would they think less of me? I want our church to be regularly telling about God's move in the lives of people. The world needs to hear, whether it's through our baptisms, which we've had some incredible ones, whether it's through the salvations, or even if it's just how people are wrestling through faith, or wrestling with their own bodies, wrestling with their own minds. When we begin to name these things and to share how truly weak we really are, it gives us an incredible platform. So in telling the totality of God's move in your life, I think we have to keep these 3 tips in mind as we share, because again, I say this, but a lot of Christians, if we can be honest, this is a desire for I want our community groups through our Be One, Make One, is that we would learn how to share our story and be confident in that. It's not about some well-articulated, you got to nail all the points or a 3 points with alliteration, then I'm out. It doesn't have to be that. But I believe that it has to be us on the tip of our tongue being willing to say, this is where God met me. In a place, honestly, right? Like, when someone's telling you something like where they feel it, or if they've rehearsed something where it feels like they're trying to sell you on something. And so 3 tips that I believe will, I think, be really helpful. One is that we have to share regularly. And these, again, I'm talking to myself here, but how quickly are you in a day-to-day, just in your comings and goings, are you thinking about how can I weave in my story with a conversation? Is that at the forefront of our minds? Because a lot of times, for me, it's just absolutely not. It's like, I do the church thing on Sunday, we do community group for me on Monday night, and then I do the rest of my life. And I believe that as we challenge and as we tell, I want us to be able to share up here. I want people, it doesn't mean you have to give a sermon, but that we will be faithful to share. This is what God has done, because I need those encouragements from you. As I'm up here sharing, I'm just one voice, but as I see the 100 in front of me today, there are stories, and I know that if you had a chance to share, the encouragement that you would be for someone else or someone else who is listening. Do y'all know on the virtual sense, just the power of testimonies that we've had in baptisms? We don't know how far. We have people all over the world even who have heard. That's the power. That's the power of God at work through his people as they share their story. Share it regularly. For safe places first, right? No one's going to throw a stone at you here. But the proverbial sense, yes, in the real world, people are going to be skeptical. They're going to say, is there really a God? They're going to want to maybe even debate you. And we've got some great apologists in the back. I'm looking at one right now. But the reality is, while we don't have to always know the answer to everyone's questions, we just got to be faithful to tell ours, tell our story. Because you know what? No one can debate that. Amen? Amen. That's right. Secondly, we've got to take time to remember, to think back, and connect. Do you understand, too, that part of this is, are we taking time to actually think about how God has been at work? Y'all know how many distractions we have on the regular. Our phones probably being first and foremost. That we rarely take time. And I'm trying to work on this. I'm trying. We have a nice front porch. I like to go out there and, stoop it, as they call it. It might be an up north term, but... And it's like the one time where I can actually begin to try to quiet my mind and begin to think back, even just what happened that day. Have y'all ever finished a day and didn't remember how it started that morning? Much less what happened a month ago or even a year. And so we have to take the time to sit down and begin to connect these themes so that we can then tell this story. Again, I don't want you just to hear, oh man, I got to tell my testimony. No, I think it's, have you started to think about maybe just some small things that have happened where maybe you sought God in prayer and he answered, and you could use that as an example that, hey, I don't pray a ton, but this time when I did pray, it worked. Or man, there was a time I felt real lonely and I got a call out of nowhere. Could that just maybe have been because God was, in his infinite mercy, was bringing someone into your life? These are the ways in which we begin to, when we take small moments to begin to think, we connect larger themes. And last point here, do we make it all about Jesus? And not me, not you. Because he's allowing us to be part of his larger story. Verses 22 and 21, Jeremiah says this, "Yet I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not perish, for his mercies never end." Speak to yourself as you speak to others. This is coming back. Jeremiah is giving us the help we need as we share our story in Christ. I love this. He says, I call this to mind. He says, I am bringing this literally back to the forefront. So I am telling my mind what it needs to think. Our minds constantly at work, small computers taking in vast amounts of input, trying to process with phones and TVs and just the amount of data and information that's out there. We are prone to distraction, prone to move frenetically from one thing to another, rarely taking time to think and process what God is doing. I love how the psalmist says in Psalm 42:11, he says this, why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? He says, hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. The psalmist is actually preaching to himself. He is scolding himself, and then he's arguing with himself. He's having this internal dialogue. He said, mind, I know you're thinking this. I'm trying to fight to believe this. I love how Martin Lloyd-Jones, the theologian, says in his book, Spiritual Depression, he writes, have you realized that most of the unhappiness in your life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? Listen to that distinction. Have you realized that most of the unhappiness in your life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? He goes on, take those thoughts that come to you the moment you wake up in the morning. You have not originated them, but they start talking to you. They bring back the problems of yesterday, etc. Someone is talking. Yourself is talking to you. Now, this man in the Psalms, his treatment was this. Instead of allowing this self to talk to him, he starts to talk to himself. He says, why are you downcast, O my soul, he asks. His soul has been depressing him, crushing him. So he stands up and says, self, listen for a moment. I will speak to you. And that's it. We have to consume, I really believe, a diet of God's word regularly to be reminded of what God has already told us about ourselves as we share our story. Because the reality is, even as you share and as you try to be bold, that you're going to come up against opposition. And honestly, a lot of that opposition is internally, mentally. Because your mind is going to say, no, did that really happen? Do I still believe in that same God who has been at work, who was at work a year ago? But I do believe that we can share boldly for these reasons. One, because God's faithful love has met us time and time again. God's faithful love has met us. And again, this goes back to, have you taken the time to think and process and begin to connect? Because God's love has been there. It's been there a lot of times when we haven't even seen it. We've been moving so quickly that we've gone past situations where his love has been so evidently present that maybe even others can see it, and yet we've missed it. Secondly, for the believer, the story ends well. Because it says here in Scripture, we do not perish. And that's not talking about our physical bodies, because we know those are wasting away daily. But we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, what is unseen is eternal. And lastly, his mercies, they never end. His mercies never end. That means even in the moments where you don't think you can get out of bed, his mercies, they never end. That means in moments where you have been hurt by a church and you don't want to step front into the doors again of a church building, his mercies, they never end. And that means that when you don't want to go back to that relationship because you have been hurt time and time again, and yes, there are times you need to step away, but sometimes God might be calling you back, and then you remember his mercies, they never end. And yet there are times when you want to walk, potentially to say, God, I can't do this Christian walk anymore. I've given up. I've tried my best. And then we wake up in the morning, and his mercies, they never end. God brought me to this church by his mercies. Can I tell you that much? I've shared it before, but I don't want to stop sharing it. I had heard about Pastor Jerome Gay, and I wanted to track him down. I was supposed to go to another church I was going to, but God had begun to just do something. I'd heard him preach at a conference, and I was like, that is someone I need to track down and talk to. So at that point, I was moonlighting at a second church. I couldn't commit, right? It's my own issues. And yet, I'd gone to a second church, and I went in, and I just felt this overwhelming sense, hey, Sandy, when the service is done, just go check, pull up on the phone, see where Vision is, go check out Vision Church, try to talk to Pastor Jerome, and just say, hey, I want to sit down and talk with you. So I walk into this church at downtown Raleigh. The associate pastor comes up and says, well, this morning, our lead pastor has just started his sabbatical, and we have a great guest pastor this morning. His name is Jerome Gay. Well, the problem was after the service, they had a second service off campus. So as I tried to make my way up there, they whisked him out and took him to the other church. So you know what I did? I followed him out there, and I waited at the other service till he finished. Say, Pastor, I got to talk to you. That was almost 9 years ago. In God's mercies, in terms of being in this church, from being on staff to being a member, being on staff, and now being able to serve as an under shepherd, as an elder, do you know his mercies? They never end. And I've got to experience the love through the people here. I've got to experience the tough parts of my story where I've been able to share things from my childhood, and I've been able to share that in groups where people have said, you know what, that's some tough stuff, but we're not running away. You are fully known, and you are fully loved here. And we're going to walk that out with you. And I've seen a never-ending stream of mercy from God as I've been here. And can I be honest with you? I think I've seen it even more so as I have taken on this mantle of eldership, which is no light thing, where the amount of trying conversations and situations that have already been a part of, can I just say to you, even as this past week, I have seen God's mercies even in a lunch conversation this week. And I've seen how he's been at work, even when it hasn't made sense, even when my mind has been telling me otherwise. I've seen God's mercies at work. Tell your whole story. Make sure that as you do, you are speaking to yourself as you speak to others and being reminded. Last 2 verses here, and then I'll be out your way. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Or as they say in the old hymn, great is thy faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will put my hope in him. Last point here. God's faithfulness fuels daily hope. God's faithfulness fuels daily hope. It's a dangerous thing to hope, isn't it? One of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, Morgan Freeman, also known as Red, puts it best, I think, when he says, hope is a dangerous thing. I wish my voice was better. Hope is a dangerous thing, my friend. It can kill a man. It sure can. Unless you are hoping on guaranteed things. Well, what's guaranteed? Well, we've already read that there are mercies that never end, that come afresh every morning. New mercies that never end. They meet us in the morning, and we are also guaranteed that this great, awe-inspiring, Christ-honoring faithfulness is not based at all on our performance. It's based on what Jesus has already done on our behalf. Jeremiah is, I do believe, helping us to hope well as we tell our story. Where's your hope this morning? What are you waiting to happen that feels burdensome? What hopes have left you utterly despondent, feeling alone and rejected? Hope in pleasing people for me as a Enneagram 3, for those of you who are into that, has left me dry, literally clawing for life as I fight for approval, even from people in this church. Where is the life and life to the full here? When Jesus becomes your everything, you can say, just like Jeremiah says, the Lord is my portion. That's all I've got. I've failed elsewhere. I've tried and tried again, and it didn't work. I thought I knew what was best. But in the end, I really did more damage. Jesus is my everything. Therefore, I will put my hope in him. I plead with you today. I do. So please tell your stories more. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be long. You are making much of Jesus as you talk about the struggles you're going through, even the rough, the raw, the stuff that you think, man, that has been covered by the cross of Jesus Christ, and therefore we are able to proclaim boldly in our weakness because it is in his strength that we're proclaiming. We have to connect, and I say this, Jesus is connecting, but he's inviting us to be a part. We're connecting this incredible Word of God that has captured our affections and has altered the lives of people here today, including myself, to a lost and dying world that is desperately looking for anything they can put their hope in. I started with the Olympics. As you know, what may have already happened, but today the flame will be extinguished. The athletes will leave Tokyo, and they'll all go home. In the end, no matter how cool they may look, and no matter how much happiness had happened in that moment, these medals, if it takes years, centuries, they will fade. They'll be handed off to someone else when we hit the grave. They'll tarnish. But much like these athletes that we've heard and seen, what cannot be taken away from them is the story of the time they spent in Tokyo and the chance that they got to compete, the chance that now they can, put on their Twitter, OLY, that they're an Olympian. In the same way, Christian, the things of this world can be taken away in an instant. But Jesus in you, working through you while we hope, that story can never be taken away. And you know what? Never grows old to a lost and dying world. I'll end with a timeless hymn that we all know. I grew up in a Methodist church here in town. We only sang hymns. So I've got just a log of hymns that are rooted in deep theology that come back to. And I love that, periodically you turn on to His Light or whatnot, and you hear these hymns come back because they are steeped in faithful saints before us. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness,
Lord, unto me. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. So great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Great is his faithfulness. Amen and amen.